Welcome back to Footnotes Folly and to Josephus' Antiquities. I am Pemberton. This is Book 13, Part 2. The Syrian usurper Trypho, climbing toward the throne over the body of a boy king, decides that Jonathan must go. We will tell the grim story of how he lured the high priest into a trap with smiles and promises, took him by treachery, and at last killed him, and how the nation, stunned, turned to the last surviving brother of Judas Maccabeus, Simon. And here the long struggle finally pays off. Simon clears the last Syrian garrison from Jerusalem, is confirmed as high priest and ruler, and wins formal independence. The yoke of the Greeks lifted from Judea for the first time in generations. Josephus marks it as the moment the nation stood free again. Let us take up the story.
There was a commander among Alexander's forces named Demetrius, an Eponemian by birth, who was also called Trypho. He noticed how much the soldiers disliked Demetrius. So he went to Malchus the Arabian, who was raising Antiochus, the son of Alexander, and told him about the army's hostility toward Demetrius. Trypho urged Malchus to hand Antiochus over to him, saying that he would make the boy king and restore to him his father's kingdom. At first Malchus resisted the plan, because he did not trust Trypho. But Trypho pressed him for a long time, and at last persuaded him to agree to his intentions and requests. This was the position Trypho was then in. Meanwhile Jonathan the high priest wanted to be rid of the men in the citadel of Jerusalem, the Jewish deserters, the wicked men, and also those stationed in all the garrisons throughout the country. He therefore sent gifts and ambassadors to Demetrius, asking him to remove his soldiers from the strongholds of Judea. Demetrius answered that when the war in which he was then deeply engaged was over, he would grant Jonathan not only this request but even greater favors. He also asked Jonathan to send him assistance, explaining that his own army had deserted him. So Jonathan selected 3,000 of his soldiers and sent them to Demetrius. The people of Antioch hated Demetrius, both because of the harm he himself had done them, and because they had also been enemies of his father Demetrius, who had treated them very harshly. They were watching for an opportunity to attack him. When they learned that help was coming to Demetrius from Jonathan, and when they considered that he would raise a large army unless they stopped him and seized him first, they immediately took up their weapons. They surrounded his palace as if laying siege to it, blocked all the exits, and tried to overpower their king. When Demetrius saw that the people of Antioch had become his bitter enemies and had armed themselves in this way, he took the mercenary soldiers he had with him, together with the Jews sent by Jonathan, and attacked the Antiochians. But they were tens of thousands strong, and he was overpowered and defeated. When the Jews saw that the Antiochians had the advantage, they climbed to the top of the palace and shot down at them from there. Because of the height, they were too far above the enemy to suffer any harm themselves, while they did great damage to the others as they fought from that elevation. They drove them out of the neighboring houses, and immediately set those houses on fire. The flames spread through the whole city and burned it down, because the houses stood close together and were generally built of wood. The Antiochians could neither defend themselves nor stop the fire, and they fled. The Jews leaped from the roof of one house to another as they pursued them, which made the pursuit astonishing to see. When the king saw that the Antiochians were busy trying to save their wives and children and were no longer fighting, he attacked them in the narrow streets, fought them there, and killed many of them. At last they were forced to throw down their arms and surrender themselves to Demetrius. Demetrius forgave them for this insolent behavior and ended the uprising. He rewarded the Jews from the rich spoils he had taken, thanked them as the cause of his victory, and sent them back to Jonathan at Jerusalem with abundant praise for the help they had given him. Yet afterward he proved to be a bad man toward Jonathan. He broke the promises he had made and threatened to make war on him, unless he paid all the tribute that the Jewish nation owed to the earlier kings of Syria. He would have carried this out if Trypho had not stopped him and turned his preparations against Jonathan into concern for his own safety. Trypho had now returned from Arabia into Syria with the child Antiochus, who was still only a youth, and had placed the diadem on his head. All the forces that had deserted Demetrius, because they had received no pay, came over to Trypho's side. He made war on Demetrius, met him in battle, defeated him, and took from him both his elephants and the city of Antioch. After this defeat, Demetrius withdrew into Cilicia. But the child Antiochus sent ambassadors and a letter to Jonathan. He made Jonathan his friend and ally, confirmed him in the high priesthood, and gave him the 4 prefectures that had been added to Judea. He also sent him golden vessels and cups, along with a purple garment, and gave him permission to use them. He presented him with a golden button, called him one of his chief friends, and appointed Jonathan's brother Simon as general over the forces from the ladder of Tyre as far as Egypt. Jonathan was so pleased with these grants from Antiochus that he sent ambassadors to Antiochus and Trypho, declaring himself their friend and ally and saying that he would join them in war against Demetrius. He explained that Demetrius had made no proper return for the kindness Jonathan had shown him. When Demetrius had been in great need and had received many marks of kindness from Jonathan, he had repaid those good turns with further injuries. Antiochus then gave Jonathan permission to raise a large army for himself out of Syria and Phoenicia, and to make war against Demetrius's generals. Jonathan therefore went quickly to the various cities. They received him splendidly, but they did not put any troops into his hands. From there he came to Ascalon, where the inhabitants came out, brought him gifts, and met him with great ceremony. He urged them, and all the cities of Celesyria, to abandon Demetrius and join Antiochus. He told them that, by assisting Antiochus, they should try to punish Demetrius for the wrongs he had committed against them, and that they had many reasons for taking this course if they wished to do so. After he persuaded those cities to promise their assistance to Antiochus, he came to Gaza, intending to persuade its people also to become friends of Antiochus. But Jonathan found the people of Gaza far more hostile to him than he expected. They had shut their gates against him, and although they had deserted Demetrius, they had not decided to join Antiochus. This provoked Jonathan to besiege them and harass their country. He placed part of his army around Gaza itself, while with the rest he overran their land, plundered it, and burned what was in it. When the people of Gaza saw themselves in this distress, and saw that no help was coming to them from Demetrius, they realized that the danger afflicting them was close at hand, while the help that might benefit them was far away and might never come at all. They therefore judged it wise to stop holding out, and to seek friendship with the other side. So they sent to Jonathan, declared that they would be his friends, and promised to give him assistance. For people are often such that, before they have experienced great hardships, they do not understand what is to their advantage, but when they find themselves under such hardships, they change their minds and choose to do what would have been better for them to do before they suffered any damage. Jonathan made a league of friendship with them, took hostages from them to guarantee their performance of it, and sent those hostages to Jerusalem. He himself then went through all the country as far as Damascus. Jonathan then heard that the generals of Demetrius's forces had come with a large army to the city Kadesh, which lies between the land of the Tyrians and Galilee. They supposed that by doing this they would draw him out of Syria to protect Galilee, since he would not ignore the Galileans, who were his own people, when war was made on them. So Jonathan went to meet them. He left Simon in Judea, and Simon raised as large an army as he could from the country. Then Simon encamped before Bethsura, and besieged it, because it was the strongest place in all Judea, and was held by a garrison of Demetrius, as has already been related. Simon raised banks, brought his engines of war against Bethsura, and pressed the siege vigorously. The garrison became afraid that the place would be taken by force, and that they would be put to the sword. So they sent to Simon, and asked him to secure them by oath from harm, promising that they would leave the place and go away to Demetrius. Simon accordingly gave them his oath, drove them out of the city, and placed a garrison of his own inside it. Jonathan left Galilee in the waters called Genesar, where he had previously been camped, and came into the plain called Asor, not knowing that the enemy was there. When Demetrius's men learned a day earlier that Jonathan was coming against them, they set an ambush in the mountains to attack him suddenly, while their main army met him in the plain. When Jonathan saw that army ready to fight, he prepared his own soldiers for battle as well as he could. But because the troops hidden by Demetrius's generals were behind them, the Jews became afraid that they would be caught between two forces and destroyed. They fled in haste, and all the rest abandoned Jonathan. Only a few stayed with him, about 50 men, including Mattathias, the son of Absalom, and Judas, the son of Chapsis, who were commanders of the whole army. These men advanced boldly against the enemy, like men who had nothing to lose, and pressed them so hard that their courage terrified them. With weapons in hand, they drove them into flight. When Jonathan's soldiers who had withdrawn saw the enemy giving way, they gathered themselves after their flight and pursued them with great force as far as Kadesh, where the enemy camp lay. After winning this glorious victory and killing 2,000 of the enemy, Jonathan returned to Jerusalem. When he saw that all his affairs were succeeding as he wished, through the providence of God, he sent ambassadors to the Romans because he wanted to renew the friendship their nation had formerly had with them. He also instructed the same ambassadors that, on their way back, they should go to the Spartans and remind them of their friendship and kinship. When the ambassadors came to Rome, they went into the Senate and delivered the message Jonathan the high priest had commanded them to give, saying that he had sent them to confirm their friendship. The Senate then confirmed what had previously been decreed about friendship with the Jews, and gave the ambassadors letters addressed to all the kings of Asia and Europe, and to the governors of the cities, so that they might conduct them safely back to their own country. Accordingly, on their return, they came to Sparta and delivered to the Spartans the letter they had received from Jonathan. Jonathan, the high priest of the Jewish nation, together with the Senate and the whole body of the Jewish people, sends greetings to the Ephori, Senate, and people of the Lacedaemonians. If you are well, and if both your public and private affairs are going as you wish, that is what we desire. We also are well. In former times, a letter was brought to Onias, who was then our high priest, from Arius, who was then your king, by Demodles, concerning the kinship between us and you. A copy of that letter is attached here. We received that letter joyfully, and were pleased with Demodles and Arius, although we did not need such proof, because we were already satisfied about this matter from the sacred writings. Yet we did not think it proper to be the first to claim this relationship with you, lest we seem too eager to take for ourselves the honor that you have now given us. It has been a long time since this relationship between us and you was renewed. When we offer sacrifices to God on holy days and festivals, we pray to him for your preservation and victory. As for ourselves, although we have been surrounded by many wars because of the greed of our neighbors, we decided not to trouble either you or others related to us. But now that we have overcome our enemies, and have occasion to send Demetrius the son of Antiochus and Antipater the son of Jason, both honorable men belonging to our senate, to the Romans, we have also given them this letter to you, so that they may renew the friendship between us. You therefore will do well to write to us and send us an account of anything you need from us, since we are fully disposed to act according to your wishes. The Lacedaemonians received the ambassadors kindly, made a decree for friendship and mutual assistance, and sent it to them. At this time there were 3 sects among the Jews, each with different opinions about human actions. One was called the sect of the Pharisees, another the sect of the Sadducees, and the other the sect of the Essenes. The Pharisees say that some actions, though not all, are the work of fate, and that some are within our own power. They are subject to fate, but are not caused by fate. The sect of the Essenes affirms that fate governs everything, and that nothing happens to people except according to its determination. The Sadducees reject fate entirely. They say there is no such thing, and that the events of human affairs are not under its control. Instead, they suppose that all our actions are in our own power, so that we ourselves are the causes of what is good, and suffer what is evil, because of our own folly. I have given a more exact account of these opinions in the 2nd book of the Jewish War. The generals of Demetrius, wanting to recover from the defeat they had suffered, gathered a larger army than before and came against Jonathan. As soon as he was informed of their approach, he went suddenly to meet them in the country of Hamath, because he was determined not to give them the chance to enter Judea. He camped 50 furlongs from the enemy and sent out spies to examine their camp and learn how they were positioned. When his spies had given him full information, and had also seized some of the enemy by night who told him that the enemy would soon attack him, Jonathan, having been warned beforehand, made arrangements for his safety. He placed watchmen beyond his camp, kept all his forces armed through the night, and charged them to be courageous and ready in mind to fight at night if they were forced to do so, so that the enemy's plans would not remain hidden from them. When Demetrius's commanders learned that Jonathan knew what they intended, their plans were thrown into confusion. They were alarmed that the enemy had discovered their purpose, and they no longer expected to overcome them by any other means now that the traps they had set had failed. They did not think they would be equal to Jonathan's army if they risked an open battle, so they decided to flee. After lighting many fires, so that the enemy would see them and suppose they were still there, they withdrew. In the morning Jonathan came to attack them in their camp, but found it deserted and learned that they had fled. He pursued them, but could not overtake them, because they had already crossed the river Eleutherus and were out of danger. When Jonathan returned from there, he went into Arabia, fought against the Nabateans, drove away a great amount of their spoil, took many captives, came to Damascus, and sold off what he had taken. About the same time, Simon his brother traveled throughout all Judea and Palestine as far as Ascalon and fortified the strongholds. After making them very strong, both by the buildings he erected and by the garrisons he placed in them, he came to Joppa. When he had taken it, he brought a large garrison into it, because he had heard that the people of Joppa were inclined to surrender the city to Demetrius's generals. When Simon and Jonathan had completed these matters, they returned to Jerusalem. There Jonathan gathered all the people together and took counsel about restoring the walls of Jerusalem, rebuilding the wall that surrounded the temple which had been thrown down, and strengthening the adjoining places with very high towers. He also proposed building another wall in the middle of the city, to cut off the marketplace from the garrison in the citadel, and thereby prevent them from having plentiful provisions. In addition, he proposed making the fortresses in the countryside much stronger and more defensible than they had been before. When the multitude approved these proposals as right, Jonathan himself took charge of the building that concerned the city, and sent Simon away to make the fortresses in the country more secure than before. Meanwhile Demetrius crossed the Euphrates and came into Mesopotamia, because he wanted to keep that country, as well as Babylon. Once he had gained control of the upper provinces, he intended to lay the foundation for recovering his entire kingdom. The Greeks and Macedonians who lived there often sent ambassadors to him, promising that if he would come to them, they would surrender themselves to him and help him fight against Arsaces, the king of the Parthians. Demetrius was lifted up by these hopes and came to them quickly. He had resolved that, if he once overthrew the Parthians and obtained an army of his own, he would make war against Trypho and drive him out of Syria. The people of that country received him with great eagerness. So he raised forces and fought against Arsaces, but lost his whole army and was himself taken alive, as we have related elsewhere. When Trypho learned what had happened to Demetrius, he no longer remained loyal to Antiochus. Instead, he schemed to murder him and seize the kingdom for himself. But Jonathan stood in the way of this plan, because Jonathan was a friend of Antiochus. For that reason Trypho decided that he must first remove Jonathan, and only afterward carry out his design against Antiochus. He thought the best way to destroy Jonathan was by deceit and treachery, so he came from Antioch to Bethshan, which the Greeks call Scythopolis. Jonathan met him there with 40,000 picked men, because he thought Trypho had come to fight him. But when Trypho saw that Jonathan was ready for battle, he tried to win him over with gifts and friendly treatment. He ordered his captains to obey Jonathan, hoping by these means to convince him of his goodwill, remove every suspicion from his mind, make him careless and unwary, and then take him when he was off guard. Trypho also advised Jonathan to dismiss his army, saying there was no need to bring it with him, when there was no war and everything was at peace. He told him to keep only a few men around him and come with him to Ptolemais, because he would hand that city over to him, and would bring all the fortresses in the country under his authority. He said that he had come for exactly these purposes. Jonathan suspected nothing in Trypho's conduct. He believed that Trypho gave this advice kindly and sincerely. So he dismissed his army, kept no more than 3,000 men with him, left 2,000 in Galilee, and went with Trypho to Ptolemais with 1,000 men. But when the people of Ptolemais had shut the gates, as Trypho had ordered them to do, Trypho took Jonathan alive and killed all the men who were with him. He also sent soldiers against the 2,000 men who had been left in Galilee, intending to destroy them. But when those men heard the report of what had happened to Jonathan, they acted before Trypho's men arrived. They put on their armor and left the country. When the soldiers sent against them saw that they were ready to fight for their lives, they did not trouble them, but returned to Trypho. When the people of Jerusalem heard that Jonathan had been captured, and that the soldiers with him had been destroyed, they mourned his unhappy fate. Everyone anxiously asked what had happened to him, and a great and reasonable fear came over them and filled them with grief. They feared that now, deprived of Jonathan's courage and leadership, the surrounding nations would become hostile to them. Those nations had remained quiet before because of Jonathan, but now they might rise against the Jews, make war on them, and force them into the greatest dangers. What they feared did in fact happen. When those nations heard of Jonathan's death, they began to make war on the Jews, who now seemed to be without a ruler. Trypho himself gathered an army and intended to go up to Judea and make war against its inhabitants. But when Simon saw that the people of Jerusalem were terrified by their situation, he wanted to speak to them and make them more determined to resist Trypho when he came against them. So he called the people together in the temple and began to encourage them. "My countrymen, you know well that our father, my brothers, and I have willingly risked our lives to recover your freedom. Since I have so many examples before me, and since our family has resolved to die for our laws and our worship of God, no terror will ever be strong enough to drive that resolve from our souls or replace it with love of life and contempt for honor. Follow me, then, with confidence wherever I lead you. You are not without a commander who is willing both to suffer and to do the greatest things for you. I am not better than my brothers, so that I should spare my own life, nor am I so much worse than they that I should avoid and refuse what they judge the most honorable thing of all, to die for your laws and for the worship of God that belongs especially to you. I will therefore give proper proof that I am truly their brother. I am bold enough to expect that I will avenge their blood on our enemies, deliver you all, with your wives and children, from the injuries they intend against you, and with God's help, preserve your temple from being destroyed by them. For I see that these nations despise you because you are without a ruler, and that this encourages them to make war against you." By this speech Simon gave courage to the multitude. Before they had been discouraged by fear, now they were raised to a good hope for better things. The whole people cried out together that Simon should be their leader, that he should rule over them in place of his brothers Judas and Jonathan, and that they would readily obey whatever he commanded. So Simon immediately gathered all his own soldiers who were fit for war. He hurried to rebuild the walls of the city and strengthen them with very high and strong towers. He also sent a friend of his, Jonathan the son of Absalom, to Joppa, ordering him to drive the inhabitants out of the city, because he feared they might hand it over to Trypho. Simon himself stayed behind to secure Jerusalem. Trypho left Ptolemais with a large army, came into Judea, and brought Jonathan with him in chains. Simon also came to meet him with his army at the city Adida, which stands on a hill, with the plains of Judea lying below it. When Trypho learned that the Jews had made Simon their ruler, he sent a message to him and tried to deceive him by fraud and treachery. He said that if Simon wanted his brother Jonathan released, he should send him 100 talents of silver and 2 of Jonathan's sons as hostages, so that when Jonathan was released he would not make Judea revolt from the king. Trypho claimed that Jonathan was being kept in chains because he had borrowed money from the king and now owed it to him. But Simon understood Trypho's cunning. He knew that if he gave him the money, he would lose it, and that Trypho would still not release his brother. He also knew that by sending Jonathan's sons, he would be handing them over to the enemy. Still, he feared that if he did not send the money and Jonathan's sons, the people would accuse him of causing his brother's death. So he gathered his army and told them what Trypho had offered. He added that the offer was a trap and full of treachery, but that it was better to send the money and Jonathan's sons than to be blamed for refusing Trypho's terms and so refusing to save his brother. Accordingly, Simon sent Jonathan's sons and the money. But after Trypho received them, he did not keep his promise and did not release Jonathan. Instead, he took his army and marched around through the country, intending afterward to go to Jerusalem by way of Idumea, while Simon moved opposite him with his army and kept pitching his camp across from Trypho's. The men in the citadel sent to Trypho and begged him to hurry to them and send them provisions. Trypho prepared his cavalry as if he would reach Jerusalem that very night. But so much snow fell during the night that it covered the roads and made them so deep that they could not be crossed, especially by cavalry. This kept him from coming to Jerusalem. So Trypho moved away from there and came into Celesyria. Then he made a violent attack on the land of Gilead and killed Jonathan there. After ordering that Jonathan be buried, he returned to Antioch. Simon, however, sent men to the city basket to bring away his brother's bones, and he buried them in their own city, Modin. All the people made great lamentation over him. Simon also built a very large monument for his father and his brothers, made of white polished stone. He raised it to a great height so that it could be seen from far away, built cloisters around it, and set up pillars, each made from a single stone. It was a wonderful work to see. He also built 7 pyramids for his parents and his brothers, one for each of them. These were remarkable both for their size and for their beauty, and they have remained to this day. We know that Simon devoted such care to Jonathan's burial and to building these monuments for his relatives. Jonathan died after he had been high priest for 4 years, and had also governed his nation. These were the circumstances of his death. Simon was made high priest by the multitude. In the very first year of his high priesthood, he freed his people from slavery under the Macedonians and allowed them to stop paying tribute to them. They gained this freedom and release from tribute after 170 years of the kingdom of the Assyrians, counted from the time when Seleucus, called Nicator, took control of Syria. The people's affection for Simon was so great that in their private contracts with one another and in their public records they wrote, "In the first year of Simon the benefactor and ethnarch of the Jews." Under him they prospered and defeated the enemies around them. Simon overthrew the cities of Gazara, Joppa, and Jamhais. He also took the citadel of Jerusalem by siege and threw it down to the ground, so that it would no longer serve as a refuge for their enemies, who had used it up to that time to harm them whenever they held it. After doing this, he thought the best and most useful course was to level the very mountain on which the citadel had stood, so that the temple would be higher than it. He called the multitude to an assembly and persuaded them to demolish it, reminding them of the miseries they had suffered from its garrison and from Jewish deserters, and of the miseries they might suffer in the future if any foreigner gained the kingdom and placed a garrison in that citadel. This speech brought the multitude to agree, because he urged them to do only what was for their own good. So they all set themselves to the work and leveled the mountain. They worked at it day and night without interruption, and it took 3 whole years before it was removed and brought completely level with the rest of the city plain. After that, the temple was the highest of all the buildings, since both the citadel and the mountain on which it had stood had been demolished. These actions were carried out under Simon. Not long after Demetrius had been taken prisoner, Trypho, who had been his governor, killed Antiochus, the son of Alexander, who was also called the God. Antiochus had ruled for 4 years. Trypho claimed publicly that Antiochus had died while being treated by surgeons. After this, Trypho sent his friends and closest companions to the soldiers, promising to give them a large amount of money if they would make him king. He reminded them that Demetrius had been captured by the Parthians, and suggested that Demetrius's brother Antiochus, if he became king, would harm them severely in revenge for their rebellion against his brother. The soldiers expected to gain wealth by giving the kingdom to Trypho, and so they made him their ruler. But once Trypho had control of affairs, he showed how wicked his character really was. While he was still a private man, he had made himself familiar with the common people and had pretended to be very moderate, skillfully drawing them wherever he wanted. But as soon as he had taken the kingdom, he dropped all pretense and showed himself to be the real Trypho. This conduct strengthened his enemies against him. The soldiers hated him and deserted him for Cleopatra, the wife of Demetrius, who was then shut up in Seleucia with her children. Antiochus, the brother of Demetrius, who was called Soter, was not being admitted by any of the cities because of Trypho. So Cleopatra sent to him and invited him to marry her and take the kingdom. She did this because her friends urged her to do it, and because she feared for her own safety in case some of the people of Seleucia should hand the city over to Trypho. When Antiochus came to Seleucia, his forces grew larger every day. He marched out to fight Trypho, defeated him in battle, and drove him out of Upper Syria into Phoenicia. Antiochus pursued him there, and besieged him in Dora, a fortress that was hard to capture, where Trypho had fled. Antiochus also sent ambassadors to Simon, the Jewish high priest, proposing a treaty of friendship and mutual assistance. Simon readily accepted the invitation, and sent Antiochus large sums of money and supplies for the men besieging Dora. By this he provided for them very generously, so that for a short time Simon was regarded as one of Antiochus's closest friends. Still, Trypho escaped from Dora to Apamia, where he was captured during the siege and put to death after he had reigned 3 years. Antiochus, however, forgot the valuable help Simon had given him in his time of need. Because of his greedy and wicked nature, he gave an army of soldiers to his friend Syndibius and sent him at once to ravage Judea and seize Simon. When Simon heard that Antiochus had broken his treaty with him, he was already advanced in years. Even so, angered by the unjust treatment he had received from Antiochus, and forming a resolution more vigorous than his age could easily support, he went out like a young man to command his army. Simon sent his sons ahead with the strongest of his soldiers, while he himself marched with the army by another route. He placed many of his men in ambush in the narrow valleys between the mountains. Not one of his attempts failed, and every action he proved stronger than his enemies. After this he spent the rest of his life in peace, and he also made a treaty with the Romans. Simon ruled the Jews for 8 years in all, but he met his end during a feast. His death was caused by the treachery of his son-in-law Ptolemy. Ptolemy also seized Simon's wife, and 2 of his sons, and kept them in chains. He sent men to kill John, the 3rd son, whose name was Hyrcanus. But the young man saw them coming, escaped the danger they posed, and hurried into the city Jerusalem. He trusted in the goodwill of the people because of the benefits they had received from his father, and because that same people hated Ptolemy. So when Ptolemy tried to enter the city by another gate, they drove him away, since they had already admitted Hyrcanus.
And we will halt there, with Judea free and Simon honored as high priest and prince. The Maccabean dream realized at last. That the family that won freedom by the sword will now have to learn to rule, and ruling corrupts in ways that fighting does not. Next time, in part 3, the long and mostly glorious reign of Simon's son John, Hyrcanus' conquests, his forced conversion of the Idumeans, the destruction of the Samaritan temple, and the final collapse of the old Seleucid enemy and the first Hasmonean to call himself not just priest, but king. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there's a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.